ჩვენ ვაგრძელებთ ლექციების სერიას, რომელსაც მხარს უჭერს აკადემიური შვეიცარიის კავკასიის ქსელი და მოგეხსენებათ, რომ ლექციების ციკლის ათაურია კრიტიკა და კრიზისი. ჩვენ ამჯერად მესამე ასეთ ლექციას ვატარებთ და ძალიან საინტერესო ავტორის ლექცია გვექნება დღეს. ეს გახლავთ პროფესორი სტივენ კოტკინი, რომელიც არის სტენფორდის უნივერსიტეტის პროფესორი და არის ალბათ ერთ-ერთი ყველაზე მნიშვნელოვანი ფიგურა საბჭოთა კვლევებში, რომელიც კი დღევანდელ ამერიკულ და ევროპულ აკადემიაში ყავს. ის ცნობილი გახდა მისი ძალიან განთქმული წიგნით მაგნიტური მთა და ძალიან საინტერესოა როგორ დაიბადა ეს წიგნი, მაგრამ მაინც მოკლედ იტყვით, რომ ეს არის გადაკვეთაზე დაიბადა ერთი მხრივ საბჭოთა ტრადიციული კვლევების და მეორე მხრივ იმდროინდელი ახალი თეორიის და კოტკინის შეიძლება ძალიან ინტერესულ ურთიერთობაში ყოფილიყო ისეთ ცნობილ თეორიებთან, როგორც არის ფუკო, მიშელ დესერტო, ლევი სტროსი, რომელიც ხშირად ჩადიოდნენ ბერკლიში, სადაც ის სტუდენტი იყო და მაგალითად შეიძლება ეს ვთქვათ ახალი მიდგომები მიუხედა მასალას, რომელიც აქამდე ასეთი კუთხით არ ყოფილა გაანალიზებული და დაიბადა ძალიან საინტერესო გამოკვლევა ერთი საბჭოთა ქალაქისა. ამის შემდეგ პროფესორმა კოტკინმა გამოკვლევა რამდენიმე ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი წიგნი, მაგალითად არასამოქალაქო საზოგადოება, განსაკუთრებით ჩვენთვისაც სხვათა შორის, ასევე თავიდან აცილებული არმაგედონი, რომელიც ეძღვნებოდა საბჭოთა კავშირის დაშლის საკითხს და შანშან გამოვიდა სამტომეული ჩამოქრებული ბიოგრაფიის, სტალინის ბიოგრაფიის პირველი ტომი, 1000-გიანი ტექსტი, როგორც მამის გუშინ გითხრა, მეორე ტომის უკვე მზადაა და არანაკლები მოცულობა, უფრო დიდი მოცულობის და ახლა შემოქმედებაზე მიდის მუშაობა და როგორც სპეციალისტები ამბობენ, ეს იქნება ყველაზე სრული და ყველაზე მომცველი ბიოგრაფია, რომელიც დღეისთვის არსებობს. პროფესორ კოტკინი დღეს ისაუბრებს საკითხზე, რომელსაც ქართულად შეიძლება რთული არ თარგმნა, ინგლისურად ის მოწოდებას ქვია Did the Soviet Union have to die? ქართულად ესე პირდაპირ თარგმნა, ზუსტად არ გამოდიშობენ პროზაულმა რამდენიმე მნიშვნელობით განოს უნდა მომკვდარიყო თუ არა საბჭოთა კავშირი, ალბათ უფრო სწორი იქნებოდა აუცილებელი იყო თუ არა საბჭოთა კავშირის სიკვდილი, დარწმუნებული ვარ, რომ ის ძალიან საინტერესო მოხდება იქნებოდა, მას შემდეგ შეგვიძლია იქნება შესაძლებლობა შეკითხვები დავუშვათ მას. ასევე რაღაც წიგნებსაც გადმოგცემთ შეხედა და მე შეიძლება დავაბრუნოთ, იმიტომ რომ ილიაის ბიბლიოთეკაში უნდა დაიდოს მათ კიდე, ხო? So, Professor Kotkin, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you for the honor of the invitation. This is my 5th trip to Georgia, but first trip since 2001. I made, it's been a long time since I've been here, obviously. I made my first trip here, still there was the Soviet Union. So I apologize for being unable to speak in Georgian. I hope that my accent from New York is not so strong. You can understand my English. And anyway, thank you for providing the translation. So, as you heard, I think the introduction a little bit exaggerated about my achievements, but I'm grateful. As you heard, today I'm going to speak about the collapse or dissolution, the end of the Soviet Union. And I'm going to make an argument which I've made in my books. I have written published two books on the Soviet collapse. They are now circulating, I understand.
Yes.
One, Armageddon Averted, another one, Uncivil Society. And the third one is about Soviet Union and the Third World. It's called Tar Baby. I don't know how you translate this into Georgian, but Tar Baby is something, it sticks and it doesn't come off. This is the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. So this is the way I'm going to speak: geopolitics, ideas, and institutions. Geopolitics, ideas, and institutions. It's okay if I walk around a little bit, yeah? What do I mean? Geopolitics, ideas, and institutions. This combination, I think, that helps us with the analysis and can explain what happened in the Soviet case and also in other cases. So, the first package, or first concept, the big geopolitics story. After World War II, the world changed, the world shifted. What had been a story of market collapse, capitalist crisis, Great Depression, became a story of capitalist success, middle-class economic boom in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. There has never been a greater middle-class economic boom in the capitalist world than there was in the period immediately after World War II. Most analysts at the time, people like Stalin, people like Truman, expected the possibility of another Great Depression, like in the 1930s. But instead, they got not only a boom, but a capitalist economic boom that was spread across the society, especially to the middle class. So this was a very big and unexpected change. Another big change that happened as a result and after World War II was the end of the fascist regimes which were destroyed in war. Nazi Germany, Hirohito's Japan. These became instead democratic, constitutional order. This was a very gigantic shift. In the interwar period, authoritarianism is much stronger. As a result of defeat in the war, capitalism's image and reality has changed. No longer the fascists, the jackboots, the Nazis, the Japanese imperialists. Now, stable market economy and democratic rule of law, constitutional order. A third big change that happens as a result of World War II and after is a world decolonization. The end of the British Empire, the end of the French Empire, Dutch, Portuguese. It was a bloody decolonization, very messy. It was not easy, but nonetheless it was clear that a world of colonies was coming to an end. And then I could go on. There are other big changes. The changes are in the reality and the perception of the capitalist world. If you look at the Soviet Union, it goes in the other direction. The world is moving one way, and the Soviets are moving the other way. The Soviet Union reestablishes the Stalinist economic planning. There's a rebuilding of the destruction after World War II. About 1/3 of Soviet GDP is lost in the war, and it is rebuilt, but it is rebuilt the way it was built before the war. That is heavy industry, big factories, Stalinist planning, no legal markets, only illegal markets. Same thing with the political system. The political system is reconsolidated just as it was before, monolithic, autocratic, right? Single party, censorship, monopoly over the economy, monopoly over the public sphere, monopoly over politics. Thirdly, the Soviet Union, while the world is decolonizing, is expanding and acquiring an outer empire in Eastern Europe and additional clone regimes in East Asia. Not just Mongolia, which is the first Soviet satellite from 1921, but now Poland, right? Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, as well as North Korea. Yes? Now, this movement in the other direction, the Soviets are moving in the other direction. The key to all of this is U.S. power in the world. In the period before World War II, the United States is the most powerful country, but not interested in upholding, in supporting an international system. After World War I, as you know, the United States withdraws. It doesn't remain in Europe, even though it's decisive in some ways contribution to the victory in World War I. For better or for worse, there's a withdrawal of the United States, a refusal to take full responsibility for the international system. With World War II and post-World War II, the United States is now going to remain committed in Europe and East Asia and try to defend the international system, shape and defend the international system. So if you look at these gigantic trends, as a result of the 1940s conjuncture, the Soviet Union now has a very different world that it lives in. No longer competition on the capitalist side between liberal democracy and fascism, but consolidated liberal democracy. No longer imperialism, but decolonization. No longer Great Depression and mass unemployment, but middle-class economic boom. My father worked in a factory, and he bought a house in the United States in post-World War II. It's a different world. So now, the Soviets are in a game, are in a competition, are in a rivalry. They're in a world which they did not expect, and now they must compete. And they are unable to compete in this new world. It's not a competition about Nazi tanks. Soviets won the competition with the Nazis over the tanks. T-34 tank, KV-1, KV-2, these are best tanks in the world. Soviets were able to compete with the United States and the West in military affairs. But this is a different competition. The post-World War II competition is about housing, apartments. It is about children's clothing. It is about nylon stockings for women. It is about chemical perm of your hair when you go to the hairdresser. It is about clothes and shops and daily life. It is a daily life competition. And the Soviets have no answer for the daily life competition. If it is a competition about the supermarket, the Soviets cannot win this competition. If it's a competition about the clothes made in Italy or France or Britain, the Soviets cannot win this competition. If it is a competition about toys for children, if it is a competition about anything having to do with material life, the Soviets have no answer. So in the competition, nuclear weapons, fighter planes, tanks, the Soviets are very competitive. But in the competition of middle-class life, quality of living, standard of living, size of the apartment, I remember when I was in Moscow first time, and there was a movie, Tootsie, by Dustin Hoffman. It was a silly movie, and some of you maybe remember it, most of you didn't, because it was probably before your time. And I watched with the Soviets in the theater, and Dustin Hoffman lived in an apartment in New York. I live there now myself. And he walks from one room to the next room. And then he walks to another room. And he goes to another room. And another room. And the Soviet audience is counting. How many rooms does he have in the apartment? 6, 7, 8. Can they really live like this? It must be the bourgeois propaganda. It must be a lie. But maybe it's true. And then he goes out of the apartment onto the street. He dressed up like a woman. This is the joke of the movie. But they're not watching this because he passes the shops in the background of the camera. And you see all of the oranges, all of the bananas, all of the other things. He passes a clothing shop, a retail shop. You see the dresses. And he goes down the street and they're watching. Tootsie, they're watching the life, the material life in the capitalist world. And they don't know for sure, is it true or is it just a dream? But they suspect it's real. And of course it is real. And this is the problem. So if you look very unsentimental, sober look at the Soviet Union. Soviet economy is not bad. It's fine. but it is in a competition with other economies that are stronger. I'm a pretty strong person, but if I have to fight Giga, forget it. I cannot touch him. Even though he's a gentleman, he's much bigger than me. The Soviet Union and the West, this is the same problem. Let's have a football match. And we can each pick our teams. Football match. I get United States, you get Soviet Union. Then I get France, and you get Romania. And then I get Japan, and you get Bulgaria. And then I get Italy, and you get Albania. And then I get West Germany, and you take East Germany. And then I get South Korea, and you get Angola. And I could go on. This is the competition. It's impossible for the Soviet side to win this competition because of the Western economic boom. West Germany has 10% economic growth every single year in 1950s and 60s. 10%, 11%, 13% every year. 1950, 1951, 1952. West Germany is booming. East Germany doesn't have anything like this. Same thing with Japan. Now there is a crisis in 1973, so-called oil shock. And this oil shock looks like deep crisis for the West because the factories in the West, they closed down, so-called Rust Belt, meaning the old factories produce steel, chemicals, automobiles, consume too much energy, costs are too high. When the price of oil goes up, it's not economical to run the factory. The Rust Belt begins to close. Gary, Indiana, Youngstown, Ohio, Sheffield, England, Ruhr Valley in Germany. It looks like defeat of the West. But because of market pressure, the West is forced to change, is forced to innovate, to create new industries, to change the kind of economy it has, because the market is a correcting mechanism. The Soviet economy from the oil shock, no change. Now it has more money than ever before. The price of oil goes up 400% in just a few months. So Soviet Union is exporting oil and now has 4 times the dollars it used to have in the revenue from the oil exports. This is why Brezhnev era is full of sausages in the shops. But there's only a temporary boom because oil price will decline again. All of that revenue will disappear, but no changes in the economy, no fundamental restructure. The West is on a new path from end of the Rust Belt, and the Soviet Union is still on the same path. So the Soviets have lost. They have lost a global competition. It is clear to almost nobody, because everybody is fooled. Communism looks strong. China goes communist 1949. Soviet Union, Sputnik, 1957. The Soviets look like they are the dynamic, the winning power. But this is a false impression. It's clear that the Soviets have no answer for Western power. Also, West is free. Societies are free. And the Soviets who travel to the West, they see this. And they think, how could this be? The propaganda is wrong. Mikhail Gorbachev is a young party secretary, Stavropol Krai. He's working really hard for agriculture in Stavropol. To reward him, he gets a holiday. Where does he go on holiday? For reward. He's a loyal servant of communist system. Where does he go? Does he go to Bulgaria, Romania, North Korea, Mongolia? No. He's allowed to go to Italy and France. And for 2 months, he and Raisa drive the car the Lada car, they drive it to Italy and France. This is his reward for being loyal to the Soviet system. And what does he see in Italy and France? You can imagine what he sees. The level of wealth is so much higher than Stavropol. These countries are rich, and they are free. Well, how is the Soviet Union going to compete with them? He comes home, and he wants to work harder to make the Soviet system better. But now he knows that the West is different. And more people, not that many overall, but more and more people begin to see the West with their own eyes, especially the KGB and the nomenclatura party officials. They are the ones who are allowed to travel. And they begin to defect. They work in the embassy in Greece, they run away. They work in the embassy in London, they run away. Their children come with them to the embassy abroad. They work in Soviet trade mission, and they are involved in export-import trade for Soviet Union, children of the elites. And they are not communists anymore, because they live in the capitalist world, and they are behaving in a way that is disloyal to the system. So if you think about this, the Soviet Union has lost a daily life competition with the West. But so what? So what? There is no protest in the streets. There is no defection of the forces of order, army, KGB, Interior Ministry. All of these are still solid. And so it's okay, you lose, you just keep it lid over the top. You keep the censorship, you keep the loyal forces. You don't have to give up. Just because you lose doesn't mean you have to surrender. Now, they announced reforms under Kosygin, 1979. Structural economic reforms. They never happened. They're not implemented. Remember, they have the oil money, so the incentive to reform is very slight. No push for reform. And so they are in a competition which they have lost, but they don't have to surrender. Here comes the second piece of the argument, which is ideas. First part was the geopolitics. If you don't connect the Soviet Union to the larger world picture, you don't understand why it collapsed. It collapsed because it lost the geopolitical competition with the West. And that was not a military competition, it was a daily life competition. It was a material life competition. Now, then it doesn't surrender. So why does it collapse if it doesn't surrender? And the answer is the ideas part. Ideas. What we had in 1985 was the coming to power of 1960s generation. Gorbachev and his advisors were all 1960s people. And they believed in what used to be called socialism with a human face. Socialism with a human face. Now, if you are losing a competition with the West, you don't begin to try to renew the system from socialism unless you believe in socialism. You can end the socialist economy and go to market economy. This is what China will do in the future. But this is not what the Gorbachev people do. They believe that the system can reform. They believe that the system can live up to its original ideals. That you can get a real socialism, a better socialism. They believe that Lenin was good and only Stalin was bad. They believe that Khrushchev reforms were good and should have succeeded, but the conservatives, the hardliners, ended the Khrushchev reforms before they had a chance to succeed. They believed that Prague Spring was going to succeed in Czechoslovakia, but was ended by the hardliners. They don't think that socialism is doomed. They think that socialism has not had the real chance. Let us try to do the system again. Fresh, reform. So, not the market economy, but little bit flexibility in planning. Not the end of censorship, but little bit more freedom in the press. Not the end of one-party communist monopoly, but little bit informal organizations. And they begin to open the system up to try to renew the system. It's very clear that the goal is renewal of the system, not termination of the system. But the reform dynamic of the system is liquidation. You give a little bit, open up the censorship, and people say more. They don't want to stop. You give a little bit freedom in the planned economy for market relations, people say more. You give possibility for not extra parties, but informal organizations, and people say, why can't we be a party too? We don't have to be only so-called informal, neformal. We can also be a party. And so the process of reform, the opening up of the system to renew it, begins the system's liquidation, but not intentionally. And it's because of the ideas, because of belief in socialism with a human face. The belief with socialism in a human face leads to experimentation. Prague Spring, Hungary in '56, Gorbachev, it's very similar. And it leads to the system coming apart. And the system begins to come apart. Oh yeah, closer. Sorry, not so smart, eh? The system begins to come apart because of the reforms. It is stable before the reforms. Soviet economy is still growing, all the way to 1990, still growing. It has only 2 years of contraction, 1980, 81. Otherwise, it's growing. Employment is full employment. No mass movements against the regime. Dissidents are in prison or in exile. Soviet Union is not unstable. The destabilization comes from the top, comes from the ideas, comes from the socialist renewal. People are unhappy, lot of grumbling, lot of complaining. But same thing at Princeton University. Everybody complaining all the time, grumbling all the time. This is no good, this is no good, this is no good. I want more money, I want a bigger house, I want less work. Right? That's all that my colleagues do. I leave my office, that's all I hear is complaining. We're not talking about complaints. There were many complaints in the Soviet system. We're talking about organized movement to overthrow the Soviet system. This is only in Poland. So this situation is not unstable. It is destabilized by the regime which is trying to revitalize the system. This is where the ideas come from. If Gorbachev had been more like Deng Xiaoping, more like Beria, less like Khrushchev, less like 1960s socialism with a human face, he would never have destabilized the system. So now he's done it. He's opened up the media, and people say, oh, healthcare in Sweden is so amazing. Healthcare in the Soviet Union, not so good. Poor people in Europe, they own cars. They drive their own car. Only nomenclatura driving cars here. And they keep seeing more and more and more, and the system failure, its loss to the West in the daily life competition now becomes, not from the Tutsi film, but becomes every day in the Soviet television and Soviet media because of the glasnost. And now people see. They still don't travel, but they see through their own media that the daily life competition Even the social justice, even the social welfare is better on the Western side, including in the poor countries. And this is very destabilizing, and now what's going to happen? So now it's 1990. Now it's 1990. And I am expecting crackdown. Crackdown by the elites who say reform was no good. Reform was destabilizing. In 1968, Prague Spring, Brezhnev had a meeting like this. He said, reform is a counter-revolution. Because reform dynamic is liquidation of the system unintentionally. Planning dissolves. One-party monopoly dissolved. Censorship dissolved. Because you open a little bit and the system begins like this, the sweater. You pull the thread in the sweater and the whole sweater starts to unravel. Reform, auto-liquidation. So, I'm expecting a crackdown. Hardline, just like Khrushchev, just like in '68 in Prague. When Sakharov and the scientists go to Mikhail Suslov is the head of ideology in the Brezhnev era. And they say, we need to do the science. We need the publications from the West. We need more freedom in discussion. You want the science from us? We need more freedom to do the science. You have to relax the censorship. And Suslov says, if I relax the censorship, who's going to send the tanks to Moscow? The hardliners, Suslov, understand that you cannot open the system up. Opening the system up is an auto-liquidation, self-liquidation. So I'm looking for this now. Who's going to be the Suslov? Who's going to be the hardliner? Where is the crackdown coming to end the reforms, restabilize the system? And so in 1989-90, I asked for an interview with Yegor Ligachev. Yegor Ligachev is number 2 under Gorbachev, and he's clearly a conservative or hardliner. And all the Westerners, they want to talk to liberals, Gorbachev people, perestroika, glasnost. They're constantly trying to meet with the reformers and the liberals. Me, I want to meet with the hardliners because I expect hardline crackdown. That's the dynamic of the system. So I asked to meet with Ligachev, and incredible, he says okay. Nobody's asking to meet with him. He says okay. So I go to Staraya Plощadь, Old Square, and I go up to the office, I sit down with him, and I begin to talk to him about it. Now, I have done it maybe an unorthodox way. Can I tell the story a little bit detailed? So Ligachev used to be party boss in Siberia, in Tomsk. So I went to Tomsk and to work a little bit in Tomsk. And I began to study the party materials when Ligachev was the boss in Tomsk. And I met with the people who used to work with him, and I became familiar with everything he did there. So I learned the first name and patronymic of all of the people who worked with him. The head of the KGB in Tomsk, Kim Mikhailovich. So I went to talk to all these people, and I said, you know, the liberals, they messed everything up. The system is dissolving. Only the conservatives could save the system. Now, I'm not in favor of saving the system. I'm only arguing that this is the only way it can be saved. And they say, yes, you're right. How do you know this? And I explained to them. So they call up Moscow. They call up Ligachev, whose name is Yegor Kuzmich. But if you're friends with him, they call him Yuri Kuzmich. So they call him on the phone, and the next day, there's a ticket for me to go to Moscow to meet him. And I received, the ticket is the Partina Hebron. I sit in the front of the plane. I go to Moscow. The car from Staraya Plощadь picks me up at the airport, takes me to Staraya Plощadь. I have the pass to go in, upstairs to his office, is a room bigger than this one. And he's sitting there, and I say, Yuri Kuzmich, right away. He says, how do you know this? And I say, well, you know, when Kim Mikhailovich, he says, how do you know Kim Mikhailovich? Anyway, we talked for a long time. And because he's worried the system is collapsing, is destabilizing. I'm not telling him what to do. I'm trying to see what kind of person he is and what his plans are. I'm not there to give advice. I'm there to learn. This is a true story. I later bring him to New York City. I can tell that story too. But anyway, I want to finish the ideas part, because now we're looking for the crackdown. The ideas, the socialism with the human face has destabilized everything. But where's the crackdown? So after we finish in the office, he says it's time for him to go home. So he calls for the car. Car pulls up in the front. He says, where can I drop you? I said, oh, I'm a little bit hungry. So he lives in Ulica Kasigina. If you know where Gagarina, the Ploshchad Gagarina is in Moscow, if you go up, you go to Leninsky Gorik, you know the Vorobyovsky Barak, where you have MGU. Yeah? But before, if you turn off Gagarina, there's a Ulica Kasigina. And this is where the Politburo had the houses. Who knew? But now I know. Anyway, and so also they have the dacha complex. If you know Poklonная Gora, behind Poklonная Gora is a big green forest and a mountain fence, like a wall. This is a Dachny Poselok Tsakar. So guess what? Driver picks me up, and I go to Dachny Poselok Tsakar, because Ligachev has a dacha there, and he invites me, and I ask to meet his friends, his colleagues, because I'm trying to see where's the crackdown. And they come over the house. We go for a walk in the front. Somebody comes up, he shakes a hand. It's Boris Pugo. Boris Pugo, who is going to be a very dramatic figure coming up and will commit suicide. Anyway, I go in the big dacha. It's 3 floors. Fantastic, beautiful old dacha. It's very close to the center. And Ligachev has his team. And I'm looking at the team, and it's nothing. There's nothing there. Nothing. You know how sometimes you think the Western scholars are going to be interesting because of a big name, and then they come here and they give a lecture, and you say, this is nothing. They know nothing, these people. They don't understand Georgia. They don't understand our life. They know nothing, right? But they had a big name before you met them, so it is with the Ligachev people. I left the dacha, and I said, Nishtojestvo. There's nothing here. No crackdown is coming. And if the crackdown comes, will not be serious. Because they don't know what they're doing. They are lost. Gorbachev is too clever for them. This is all a true story. I think we're okay on time. We're finished.
No, we're just fine.
Okay. So, you know from your history that the crackdown will come. The August 1991 putsch. But it will be a drunken, incompetent crackdown. It will be a failure. Correct? Because there is no Suslov. There is no competent hardliner. Because Gorbachev has promoted incompetent people. Incompetent Yazov. Incompetent Khrushchev. Incompetent Ligachev. All the people at the top are unimpressive. In sociology, this is called negative selection. Negative selection. Usually people rise because meritocracy. You get promoted because you achieved something. But in negative selection, you get promoted because you can do nothing. And so therefore they're not afraid of you. You see, because Gorbachev is afraid that they're going to do to him what they do to Khrushchev. The same thing like Khrushchev is going to happen to him. So Gorbachev in 1988, summer of 1988, he has a maneuver, camouflage maneuver, and he destroys the secretariat of the Communist Party. Destroy the secretariat of the Communist Party. Why? Because this is the one body that can conduct conspiracy and remove the general secretary. And so he emasculates the secretariat. And the party is unhinged. On the inside, summer 1988, this is in the Armageddon Verdict book that's traveling around. He does it intentionally. But here's the part where we get to institutions. Remember I promised you geopolitics, ideas, institutions. Now we get to the institutions. The institutions part, the Soviet Union as a state is a federation, is a voluntary union, and the republics have the right to withdraw from the union. And Georgia Soviet Georgia has a president, Supreme Soviet, it has ministries, it has a territory, it has a language, and it's in a voluntary union of Soviet Socialist republics. And according to the Constitution, it can leave the union. But of course, in practice, there is a Communist Party. And the Communist Party is not federal. The head of Communist Party in Georgia has the same rights as the head of Communist Party in Oryol, Vladimir, Irkutsk. They are all subordinated to the party hierarchy, party discipline. So the state is a federation, and the party is a pyramid. And if the party is strong, the federation is fake. Georgia doesn't have the chance to secede. Georgia cannot run its own affairs. But if you weaken the party, if you weaken the pyramid, if you undermine party centralization, if you emasculate secretariat of the party in Moscow, what do? You create a real federation. You don't intend this, but because of the institutions, because the party trumps the federal state, weakening the party strengthens the real federal state. And you begin to have Supreme Soviet in Georgia, Supreme Soviet in Lithuania, pass their own laws which contradict Soviet law, USSR law, contradicted by Republic law. And nothing can stop them because the party is weak, it's been emasculated, its centralized control mechanisms, its discipline, because Gorbachev is afraid, like will happen to him what happened to Khrushchev. Khrushchev removed in a conspiracy. Suslov, Brezhnev, they used the party secretariat. And so, unintentionally, Gorbachev destabilized the country, the system, and then, unintentionally, he made the hardline crackdown impossible. Because all that's left is the army and the KGB, the so-called force ministries, right? The Siloviki, that's all that's left. This is it. You have 15 de facto independent states now. But you have Soviet Army, Soviet KGB. Because KGB in Georgia is not the federal, doesn't report to the locals. Supposed to report directly to Moscow. So this is the issue now. The crackdown of the party hardliners is not going to happen. Because A, Ligachev is not Suslov, is an unimpressive figure, and B, because Gorbachev has destroyed their instrument, their institution, the Secretariat. So now we're left with only military police crackdown or end of the system. This is the drama of 1990 and 91. And we are expecting military crackdown. But what has happened? When Gorbachev has emasculated the Secretariat and introduced the elections, the direct elections for Supreme Soviet, First Congress of People's Deputies, He's trying to go around the hardliners. He's afraid of the hardliners. He thinks the hardliners are the threat. And there are these elections, and Russia also gets elections. And Russia now has its elected president, Boris Yeltsin. And he begins to create Russia KGB and Russia military. And the central elites in Moscow are now have divided loyalty. Are they Russia or USSR? Russia or USSR? If Yeltsin gives an order, do they obey Yeltsin? If Gorbachev gives an order, do they obey Gorbachev? And they are stuck. The central elite is divided. Not equally divided, but loyalties are mixed and confused. This very dramatic moment now, 1990-91. This plays out in the republics. It's there in Georgia. It's in the Baltic states, of course. But it's the Russia one that's dramatic because it's the central elite. People expect Soviet military police to fight to keep the Soviet Union. Even though there's no Communist Party hardliners capable of cracking down against Gorbachev, we expect the military police to do it. But when they try, of course, they fail, as you know. It's a dual failure. One failure is they are weak people because they have been promoted by negative selection. Another failure is divided loyalty between Russia and the USSR. But even a bigger picture is Gorbachev is against the crackdown. Why is he against the crackdown? Again, it's the ideas. He is a true believer. Socialism with a human face. He's against the bloodshed. He's against what happened to the Prague Spring. He refuses to use the force. And so to do the crackdown, they have to remove him. But he's the only one who has any political talent. Yanayev, Yazov, these people are incapable of being leaders. That's why he promoted them, because they wouldn't threaten him. So Gorbachev's refusal to crack down is a principled refusal based upon his ideas, based upon socialism with a human face. If Gorbachev had not believed in socialism with a human face, he's a patriot, patriotic. Once the system is destabilized unintentionally, he will crack down to put it back together. He doesn't want to lose the Soviet Union. He's fighting to keep it, but he won't use force. He won't use violence. And so, in the end, the Soviet Union collapses more or less peacefully. This is very important. 40,000 nuclear weapons, but not only nuclear weapons, but delivery system. Pinpoint delivery, accurate missiles can go 1,000, 1,500 kilometers, 2,000, 3,000 kilometers, hit the exact target. 40,000 tons of chemical weapons. Biological weapons, CIA didn't even know they existed. Biological weapons they only found out after the collapse of Soviet Union. So it could have been a big destruction, big blow-up, fireball. Because why should they go down themselves? Take everybody else down. Sometimes nasty regimes, when they are collapsing, they get angry, bitter, resentful, and they pull everybody else down. The British Empire did not go quietly. If you look at the Pakistan, India partition, 1947, right? Very rare that empires go peacefully. Now, Soviet Union doesn't fully go peacefully, we know. Caucasus, Tajikistan. But relative to what could have happened, it's peaceful. And here's the final ingredient. And the final ingredient is theft, is stealing. You see, because the Soviet elites, once the system has been destabilized, right, they have options. They can acquire the property. You sit in the office on Staraya Ploshchad or in the ministry, and you say, this dacha belongs to me. This factory belongs to me. This property is mine. This bank account in the foreign country is going to change to my name. And the Soviet elites steal, they begin to steal everything. They steal so much property, it's unbelievable. They say the Soviet state is the richest state in the world because so much can be stolen. Who knew that there was this much property that was available? What is a state property? Who owns a state property? The city, the province, the republic, the union, the ministry, the minister, the factory director. They all decide, I own it. And they begin to try to steal it, including from each other. So this creates disincentive to defend the system. Theft of property. So even though it's very bad for the stealing is part of why collapse is peaceful. If I could steal the property, why do I need to crack down? If all of this can be mine, why do I need to defend the system? Final piece of the puzzle is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? Because we understand our central elite, but what about the republic elites? For them, collapse can be good. They don't lose power. Normally, in a state collapse, elites lose power. They lose everything. So they want to stay. They want to fight. They want to struggle. They're ready to kill anybody to hold a seat of power. But if the Soviet Union goes, they get to be head of Georgia, head of Azerbaijan, head of Ukraine. Who needs the Soviet Union? I can have my own state. I can stay in power. I don't have to leave office. I don't have to go to jail. I don't have to emigrate. I can stay in power because I have the republics. And I can acquire the property at the same time. I can stay in power and get rich. Creates tremendous incentive to let the Soviet system go. Okay, it's a mess, destabilized, Gorbachev, it was stupid, but now I stay and I get rich. And this is the dynamic that makes sure, first Gorbachev at the top, socialism with the human face, refused the crackdown. Negative selection, crackdown, incompetent people. Division of the elites because Yeltsin versus Gorbachev. And then republic place to retreat for the local elites and steal the property. So the property was stolen across the 11 time zones. And state collapses, system collapses, and they're all still there. You go the next day to the office, and there they are. And now they're owners, not just bosses. It's unbelievable, but it's important contribution because it means no Armageddon, no big fireball destruction of the Soviet collapse. Now, in conclusion, because I want to have questions here, I wrote another book, as I said, Uncivil Society, about the Eastern Europe and the role of Berlin Wall, and all of these questions have to factor in also the Eastern Europe case. And I have a forthcoming book, as I said, about Soviet Union, Afghanistan, and whether this is a contribution. But I reserve this maybe for the question period, and I end my talk here because already I talked too long. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Stephen, very much for this outstanding lecture, both in terms of the content and the form. I'm pretty sure we all were very impressed. So, to allow the audience to ask more questions, we'll take several questions at once. So, who will do the first?
I would like to know, if possible, you talked about whether it was possible or not to keep Soviet Union system alive. Do you have any suggestions what would retain that system alive? And one more thing, if possible. Was system, was the institution or geopolitics even mattered when ideologically the system was working itself?
Yes, okay. Okay, thank you. Excellent question. Thank you for that. Can they hear me or no?
Yeah, yes, should you answer directly?
Yes.
Okay.
So, how to save the Soviet Union? Part of the answer is what to do with Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe is a big problem for them. Gorbachev does not fully understand that Eastern Europe will unravel and they will lose Eastern Europe. He's expecting Gorbachev people like himself to take power in Eastern Europe and for there to be reform. But there's no Gorbachev people in Eastern Europe, only the hardliners, and they hold power. Keeping Eastern Europe is impossible if you reform the Soviet Union. It's a long story, but the basic answer is Eastern Europe elites capitulated. They live closer to the capitalist world. They see the capitalist world. East Germans watch West German television every night. As Ulrich wrote to Khrushchev, the imperialists are broadcasting hate into our living rooms here in East Germany every night, right? So in Eastern Europe, the elites are not socialism with a human face. They are cynics holding power, not really believing in the system, but not wanting to give up power, and facing the problem that the West has won. You can see that the East German and East European elites, they wear clothes from the West, they drive Mercedes-Benz. The mafia around the whole world drives Mercedes-Benz, including East European communist nomenclature. Except in East Germany, they drive a Volvo, because they cannot drive the West German Mercedes-Benz. So where they live in East Germany, the elites is called Volvogram. But they send their children abroad, they wear all the goods that are produced by wage slavery, capitalist exploitation. This is the sign of prestige in Eastern Europe. So they live in a capitalist-dominated world, and they see the loss, the crushing in the daily life directly, where for the Soviet people, it's a little more removed through Tutsi and these kinds of things. So Eastern Europe is a big problem. There's no way to keep it. So to keep the Soviet Union, you have to stop the wave. If East Europeans give up, capitulate, you have to draw the line. Okay, we will let Poland go, but not Ukraine. Or we will let Poland go, but not Caucasus. And this is not understood by Gorbachev or the rest of the elites, that they need to have a hard line drawing of the line, because East Europe unraveling will push on to the Soviet Union. And Lithuania will say, oh, if Poland can get out, what about Lithuania? It's close. Poland and Lithuania used to be part of the same state many centuries ago, right? So this is one big problem that they have. The other big problem is the economy. They don't know yet about China. China is not understood. The Chinese reform is give up the socialism in the economy, go for market economy, but keep the political power, right? Political power like this, even more political power, more centralization, but economics, capitalism, market economy. This is the way the Chinese regime, Leninist market, that they have survived, Chinese leadership. Chinese communists are still in power. But this is only clear later. The people in the Soviet Union and the elites, they don't see the China possibility yet. They're studying China. They're trying to learn what the Chinese are doing, but it's unclear to them. So they have the problem of Eastern Europe, which is difficult to surmount, and they have the problem of not understanding Chinese pathway, which so far for China has worked. Whether it could have worked for the Soviet Union, we never know, but they didn't try the Chinese version. So to survive, the Soviet Union had to have less socialism with a human face, less Khrushchev, less Gorbachev, and more Deng Xiaoping, more Beria. And then they can say, forget about this ideology, forget about this communism, forget about this planned economy, let's just hold the state together. Let's keep the power at the top. And gradually open the economy. The Chinese story is very complicated because the Communist Party was against the reforms. Reforms were done. The peasants themselves created the market economy in China during Cultural Revolution, when the Mao destabilizes the country and the peasants don't want to die. And they create the market economy, and then the communist regime of Deng Xiaoping doesn't have the power to undo the peasant market, because there's 400 million peasants live in the coastal regions. So the Communist Party in China didn't initiate the reform. The market grew against the party during Cultural Revolution chaos. But nonetheless, it was not easily understood in Moscow, 1985, 1988, 1989. Remember, Tiananmen Square, 1989 in June, right? We didn't know. Was China going to be stable? Was China going to stay rich? Were they still going to keep the market economy after the big crackdown? So it was an ambiguous moment. But this was the pathway for salvation, the tension. Draw a line on Eastern Europe and go for Chinese model. Now, we'll never know if this would have worked in the end. But the reform was a mistake if you want to keep the system. This is clear. The reform is a good thing if you want the system to die. And I think probably most people in this room are happy that Gorbachev did this reform. Very little nostalgia, maybe in this room, for old Soviet Union, right? But that doesn't mean that everything that happened in the Soviet collapse, the theft of the property, is very pathological pathway out of the Soviet Union. And the more time in the Soviet Union, the more pathology, right, we see. And so the collapse could have taken different form and could have been less pathological potentially. This would have shaped the future and where we are today.
I have a question. Do you think that the everyday life in Soviet Union, which was so much based on tactical maneuvering and cultural blood, supported the system and did not ruin it? It was more creating the system or not?
Yes, thank you. Another excellent question. I see the audience is challenging. I hope I can answer this question. So it's a paradoxical. The answer is not yes or no. The answer is yes and no. Authoritarian systems are more flexible than we understand. The key variable in all authoritarian systems is willpower of the elites. Willpower of the elites. Because revolution is about withdrawal of support for the system by the elites. It's not about the protest in the streets. It's not about the complaining in the kitchen. It's about the elites saying, no good, it's not working, or I want to take over, I want the power, or I want to change the system, right? This is the dynamic of change. If the elites at the top support the system, right, it can be very strong, very resilient. Authoritarian regimes, as long as you don't do things like what Gorbachev did, can be resilient. So even though many people are doing shadow economy, illegal trade, circulation of samizdat and tamizdat, right? They're doing all of this, it doesn't necessarily threaten the system. It begins to threaten the system when the elites do such things. This is a big problem. Because when the crisis hits, will they hold the system? Will they do all that they can to hold it? Or will they just say, it's not worth holding, can't be? They lose the will, they lose the resolve. Yes? This is the key variable. Now that key variable, the will and resolve of the elites, is related to international picture, right? If you work in a KGB and you see KGB station in New York or Washington. You send a young person, best one you have, and they go there, and 6 months later they disappear and they defect. You do it again. You send your best person, they go to New York, they defect. Again and again and again, defecting, elites defecting. It's frightening, the KGB in the 1980s, internal report. If you read the KGB assessments, they are scared that the system is dissolving defection. And they welcome Gorbachev because they think he's going to revitalize the system, not destroy the system. But there's a little bit of fear in the elites. They go to Poland, they look at solidarity, and they say, big trouble is the whole society. But remember, it's a crackdown by Jaruzelski in December 1981. 5,000 to 6,000 people arrested in one night in December 1981. Solidarity driven underground. More than 10 million members. Solidarity put back in the box, and the Communist Party in Poland holds on. So even in Poland, elite with resolve, with the desire to hold the system, to do whatever is necessary, can stabilize and keep it going for a while. This was the case in the Soviet Union also. But the elites, they lost their resolve. First, they didn't understand the union problem, the federation, and then they were shocked. What does this Lithuanian parliament passing the laws contradict the union? What does the Georgian Supreme Soviet passing laws, right? So they didn't understand. They were surprised by this, but gradually they began to understand, and this eroded, corroded their resolve. And then came the property and the theft, but so elite resolve was the key. But daily life in the Soviet Union, even the theft, even the stealing, even the second economy sometimes is supporting the system. Because the factory director is doing Tjenovaya Ekonomika to fulfill the plan. Not to always steal the money himself, but to support the system. So he's cheating the system to support the system. So it is a contradictory picture. And it only becomes dissolving, like chemical solvent to dissolve it, when the elite loses its resolve. This is the key variable. But this is true in almost all revolutions.
If I understood correctly, you did not place a lot of importance or weight on the independence movements in the Baltic states or Georgia in the context of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So could you just very briefly elaborate on that? And you also placed a lot of focus on the exposure to material wealth and fruits of the modern capitalism in the context of cracking the Soviet society. Today's Russia is fully exposed to these fruits. Yes, there is sometimes more elite agreement, sometimes less, but nevertheless Russia or Russian system views the West as a, as they say, civilizational foe. So what do you think makes that system tick? Thank you.
Another easy question. In fact, two easy questions in one. So independence movements, these do not exist until Gorbachev. There are no significant independent movements that threaten the Soviet Union in any way until Gorbachev. There are ecological movements, especially the Baltic ecological movements against the nuclear power. There are religious movements for religious freedom, and these are the most powerful because these people are willing to die for their beliefs, the religious dissidents. But the independence movements are contained by the system. They do not threaten the system. Gorbachev opens up the system. He's looking for support. He's looking to rally support in the society to pressure the hardliners who are against reform. And he begins to encourage the so-called People's Front, not only Front. It's People's Front for support of perestroika. That was the original title. I went to the Baltics in the early 1980s, and I met with them, and All of them receiving money from where? From KGB. Not because they are bad people, but because KGB is ordered to create mass movement in a society to support perestroika. Now, the people in the independence movements, they are really for independence. They are not for perestroika. They want out of the system. And so Gorbachev invest in them, give them support, allow them to have elections, allow them to march in the streets. They have a different idea of what reform means. To them, reform means get out of the Soviet Union, not support of Gorbachev and perestroika. But it is a mistake by Gorbachev, a miscalculation, to open up and allow not KGB's suppression of movements, but KGB encouragement of movements. This is a very big shift, 1987, 1988. By 1989, there are elections. And there's much more freedom of the press, much less censorship. And now the independence movements, they have the mind of their own. They don't want communist reform. They want end of communism. They raise the Georgian flag, not the Soviet flag. They talk about market economy, not reform of the planned economy. They talk about freedom, not relaxation of censorship. Correct? Okay. Where does this come from? It's in the society, but it is only enabled by the regime's reform project. It was not able to come up break through without the Gorbachev reforms. So this is not to say that the independence movements are unimportant. Yes, they are important. But where do they come from? How do they get important? It's because of Gorbachev's idea of socialism with a human face. This empowers the independence movements to go against socialism, unintentionally by Gorbachev, but intentionally by the independence actors. The answer is more complicated and could take much longer, but this is the basic answer. Yes, important, but because of the ideas of socialism with a human face. Now, on to today's Russia. This is a very difficult question to answer in a short period of time, right? Russia has never been integrated into the West. Russia is Western in culture, Western in religion, but it is not of the West. Institutionally, politically, economically. Japan is not Western. Japan has no Western religions, right? It doesn't have Western civilization, but Japan is of the West. The question of the West is an institutional question, not a cultural question. Russia is culturally West, but not of the West. Japan is culturally not West, but of the West. If you have certain institutions, you are Western. Russia has never had those institutions. It has always had autocratic system, always had state-dominated economy, and always had bad relations with its neighbors. Very few alliances, a kind of definition of Russia as special country, exceptional country, providential power, meaning under God, or providence, providential power. And this is the dynamic we see through the centuries, and we see it again now. The problem for Russia is that the West got bigger, Russia got smaller, and China is rising. So the anti-Westernism of Russia is not going to work now. Russia is much weaker than the Soviet Union. The West is much stronger than it ever was. And China is now building Eurasia all the way from the South China Sea to Europe with the infrastructure. And so you have Chinese power, greater Eurasia, which Russia has no answer for. You have the West, which now has Baltic states, now has Poland, even Bulgaria and Romania, right? And Russia is strategy of anti-Western self-definition is a failure, is a cul-de-sac, is a dangerous dead end. This is a terrible situation for the people of Russia. It's a terrible situation for the neighbors of Russia. It's destabilizing for the United States. It's not good to have Russia in this posture. It's not good for anybody. Now, you can say that Russia was mistreated, that Russia was humiliated, that the end of the Cold War was imposed bad system on Russia. You can make all of these arguments. Okay, fine, if you want to make those arguments, it's fine by me. But the bottom line is, Russia cannot alone oppose the West, especially when the West and the East are now growing equally strong, or almost as strong as each other. When the sanctions came to Russia, and Russia said, okay, no problem, Western sanctions. We go to China. We go to China for the loans. We go to China for the technology. Not only investment, but technology transfer from China. What do we see? Nothing. Nothing. Chinese signed paperwork with Russia, but no implementation. Big deals, report in the press, but in fact, no Chinese investment, no Chinese loans, and of course, no Chinese technology transfer. Chinese are stealing the technology from the Americans and the Germans on the internet. They're not going to give it or even sell it to Russia, right? And so the Russian strategy, to me, looks like a very difficult situation at that end. However, it's part of a big structural process, not one individual, not just Vladimir Putin, right? It's a bigger, there are bigger forces at work that push Russia into the situation, but it's a poor choice for Russia and for the whole world where Russia is right now.
It was really impressive, and for me especially because, well, today can be a bit symbolic because Georgia has moved to another step towards Europe, and I want to congratulate everyone once again. So as for my question, you have partly answered the question, but as we learned from the history, we do know that some empires do crash down, and you mentioned the case scenario which can happen in Russia as well. But there's interesting thing like Russia invests in education, and I've worked with different international organizations which they support Russian students to go abroad and study in Europe and even in the US.
Yes.
And what can these phenomena be called? Like if Russia supports the brain drain from their country because they do not require their students to go back to their country. So what is their plan B? Are these people like agents or something? Or why does this country support these kind of activities? Thank you.
Yes, another difficult question. I'll try my best. I didn't know it was going to be such a good audience. So I thank the rector for this, but put a little bit extra pressure on me. Yes. So how to answer your question? So let's first of all state, Russia is amazing civilization. Russia is a world civilization. It has a world culture. Very few countries have produced what Russia has produced. It's very impressive. At the same time, the political institutions in Russia are poor, very poor. System is personalized. System is corrupt. The system destroys human capital even as it's trying to build human capital at the same time, contradicting, right? This is the dilemma that we have seen in Russia through the ages. How to get better institutions. How to only build human capital, not build and destroy at the same time, right? It would be much better for Russia if the people weren't fleeing. The best people are going abroad. The best people go to London and stay in London. Go to Paris and stay in Paris. Go to wherever and stay there. Is this good for Russia? I don't think so. But you know, Albert Hirschman, I'm sure you have been taught by your rector, about Albert Hirschman, he had a dichotomy between exit and voice, between protest and exile, exit and voice. And sometimes we don't see protest, we don't see voice because exile, because of exit. Because people can leave, and they do leave, and they are talented enough to make it in the other society. It's very difficult to live in a foreign country, to use your skills and to have the same level of achievement that you could have at home, because the language is different, the universities are different, the degree is recognized, maybe not recognized. So exit is a risky and difficult option, but people are willing to risk it, because voice gets them nothing, and exit, they are talented, and they feel that they can achieve if they go. So if you travel around, you see Russia and its achievements not only in Moscow, or even primarily in Moscow, but in London and Paris and all other great cities, right? Only if Russia gets better inside Russia do these people come back. And then they are a great force of good, because they have skills, they have talent, they have knowledge of foreign languages, they have expertise, finance, economics, culture, whatever, computers, whatever it might be, right? And this can be amazing if it were to come back. But it requires big internal change inside Russia. Russia always gets in the same situation. It's called Fortress Russia. Fortress Russia. Okay. Isolate. Self-isolate from the West. The West is our enemy. The West tried to sabotage Russia. The West tried to change the institutions in Russia. Close the door, circle the wagons, as we say, from the old Western Indians and American settlers' war. When the Indians came, they circled the wagons to protect. Autarky, self-isolation. This is a temptation we see again and again in Russia. But here's the problem. The West has the technology. You want to drill for oil in the Arctic Sea? Well, guess what? You need ExxonMobil. You need the Western technology, the drilling technology. You want to have fighter planes that are just as good as NATO planes? Guess what? You need the German electronics. The West has the technology, and the Fortress Russia never works. So this pushes Russia back to cooperation with the West, internal reform, open up again, diaspora comes home, reform a little bit, cooperation a little bit, technology transfer, and then again another episode of internal repression, personal rule, autarky or self-isolation, exit or exile, again. Temptation, Fortress Russia, forced open to reform a little bit, back to temptation of Fortress Russia, this dynamic. It's debilitating, very debilitating for Russia, this dynamic. Russia needs to be a normal country. Look at Germany after World War II. It's the most impressive story in the whole world, post-World War II Germany. From Nazism to stable, democratic market economy that's accepting talent of Georgia to produce a PhD or habilitation.
Lots of people here.
Yes. Very impressive Germany. It's completely transformed. And so this is what we're waiting for Russia. But Germany doesn't have the special, exceptional, providential power, great mission in the world, Third Rome, Byzantium, all of these other things that Russia holds very dear. So Russia tried to become a little bit like West Germany in the 1990s, a normal country, but we saw the results. Soviet legacy was too hard, and internal dynamic sabotaged them.
Do you think, how long do you think Putin, the guy who really doesn't lack any willpower, as you said, Soviet leaders, how long will he last in this existing situation with the crisis in Ukraine, the Syrian situation now where he got involved, the ongoing occupation of Georgia and very low energy prices. And also another part of the same question, do you think that his idea of Eurasian Union is stillborn? Does it have any feasibility? Is it useful at all?
Okay, so what do you think? I don't know anything about the future. I study history. And if it's a history question, I'm okay, more or less. But the future, I'm not so good. What do you think about Putin?
Take a risk. Take a risk, Mr. Question. Because you know past so well that you might be able to predict a little bit the future.
I knew it when he was too clever. You know, he can stay a long time. Authoritarian regimes can adapt. If the leaders are smart, if they have a little bit of flexibility, they move this way, they move that way, they can stay a long time. Look at the Chinese communists. People in the West predicting collapse of Chinese communist regime every year now. Collapse of North Korean regime. Ever since I have been old enough to know the words North Korea, they've been predicting collapse, right? But authoritarianism can be more flexible depending on who's in charge. It can have a little bit of adaptation. When the crisis hits, we see, is it resilient or not resilient? So unfortunately, I think the Putin regime can outlast everybody in this room. He's only 63? How old is he? Yeah, 63. So Stalin was 30 years. Brezhnev was 18. Brezhnev was 18. He died twice. Brezhnev died. He died clinically dead for 93 seconds. And then he was revived by the doctors and he lived 6 more years in power and died again. So even to die is not the end. So it could be, I make no predictions here, but it could be that they manage, they find a way to maneuver in the situation. Sanctions over Ukraine, but then Syria is an opportunity. Maybe there's a new round of economic reform and friendliness with the West again. Dismiss the prime minister, new government, blame them from before. Maybe the West goes into crisis like 2007, 2008, because not everything depends on Russia. Financial crisis was a big deal, and both Russia and China believed that the financial crisis was going to keep the West down for a long time. But the West proved resilient after the financial crisis. It was shocking to Russia and China, right? But maybe the next crisis hits the West, and the West doesn't recover. And so the Putin regime hold on, Western crisis, and then breathing room, right? Plus, they're not so stupid. If I know anything about this regime, they know plenty about their own regime, correct? And they are not so anti-Western as they pretend to be. When the first time I worked for a Soros organization, I went to Belarus to study higher education because I was a revisor. You know, the revisor, like from Global. And I went to study what's happening, and I got to Belarusian State University, and children of Lukashenko, sons of Lukashenko. Now, Lukashenko was very anti-Western, always giving fiery speeches. The sons, what were they studying? International relations and foreign languages. And they traveled to Western Europe to do the stagirovka. So the dad gets on the television, the West is evil, the West is trying to destroy Belarus, and the sons of the same man are killing, cheating, struggling, bribing to get into the West, right? And so this is the dynamic that we see the same thing with the Russian elites. The West is too important for them. What is Eurasian Union? We have a word for Eurasian Union in English, but it's impolite. It's an impolite word. You know, sometimes the grass doesn't grow, so you put the fertilizer on the grass to make it grow. And the fertilizer, you know what it is? This is the Eurasian Union. Okay? Joining the West means what? It means big market, 350 million people in Europe alone, right? $18 trillion economy, latest technology. If you are part of this, you can grow strong. What do you get? Union, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan. What does this give you? What's the size of the market? What is the investment capital that they have to supply to Russia? What is the technology that Russia is going to get from Armenia and from Belarus, right? Eurasian Union is, it's nothing. It is a dead-end strategy. Completely dead-end strategy. Now it's over anyway, because after Crimea, Kravchuk called Lukashenko on the phone and said, be careful, watch out. And Nazarbayev joined the call. Kravchuk was a negotiator for Poroshenko with the Russians over the situation in eastern Ukraine, right? Nazarbayev and Lukashenko are not stupid people. They've been in power since before Soviet collapse in the Nazarbayev case and right after Soviet collapse in the Lukashenko case, right? And so they don't even want to be part of the Eurasian Union, but even if they do form the Eurasian Union, it gives Russia nothing. No market, no large market, no financial capital, no technology transfer, no geostrategic significance. Okay, you get a military base in Belarus.
I appreciate your coming here. It was really amazing. I truly enjoyed your lecture. I need to get back to the topic, which is Soviet Union. A lot of people think that Afghanistan invasion was like a sponge. It absorbed all the resources that Soviet Union had, so it accelerated the destruction. Do you think it was Achilles heel of Soviet Union, so it collapsed earlier? Another question was FBI agent Mr. or maybe not Mr. Robert Hansen, who spied for Soviet Union. What was justification for him to do such an awful job? And were there some people in your time when you were growing up thinking Soviet Union was good and they could help Soviet Union agents in some way? As I know, Robert Hansen went to the embassy by himself and he offered his service to Soviets. And
so part of the power of communism was it was a globally resonant idea. Communism was meaningful outside the Soviet Union. You know, Nazism is difficult to travel. How can you have a Nazism, for example, in France? You don't have a German master race. But communism can be Soviet communism or can be French communism or can be American communism, right? It's a globally resonant idea. And if you see injustice, and there's injustice everywhere in the world, all up and down the United States, full of injustice. If you see injustice, communism maybe could look like the answer to injustice. Of course, communism is worse as a solution than the problem. Communism doesn't fix the injustice. It makes the injustice worse. But many people are slow to see this. Even today in the United States, pro-Soviet sympathy is all over universities. When I write my work, I'm not sympathetic to the Soviet Union. People accuse me of being right-wing, Cold War, anti-Soviet, and they have a kind of confusion between social democracy and the Leninism. They believe that the Leninism was social democracy. If you read the original German social democrats, what they said about Lenin, they said he was a monster, a dictator, right? The social democrats. But in the academy, there's confusion on the left, right? Between the democratic, market-oriented social democracy, like Sweden, for example, or any leftist party in Europe, versus the Leninist, which is end of democracy, end of the market, right? No freedom. So this confusion is still persisting, unfortunately. But part of this confusion could be behind the people who are sympathetic to cooperate with the Soviet Union, and part of it is just because they have financial difficulty and they're looking for financial support, because sometimes the Soviets can pay for the information. But it's a complicated question, right? But the first question you asked was Afghanistan. So this is a difficult, long and difficult question, but I do the shortest possible answer. So, 10-year war, peak deployment, meaning most soldiers at any one time. Peak deployment, Afghanistan has 105,000 Soviet troops. Total number of Soviet soldiers who rotate 10 years through Afghanistan, 600,000. Total number US and Vietnam, 2.5 million. Let's talk more. I'm only beginning, but I give a little bit more. Soviet troops in East Germany, 430,000. Soviet troops in Eastern Europe combined, 630,000. Peak deployment Afghanistan, 105,000. Moreover, troops in East Germany, elite troops. Who goes to Afghanistan? Tajik, Uzbek, penal battalion, right? People from Yoshkar-Ola, people from Kamchatka, because the others, they give the bribe, they have the money, East Germany, right? Elite troops, highest trained, best paid, and the size of East European Soviet Army. Total Soviet Army, complete everything, 5 million. Afghanistan, 105,000 is the highest. Many years is less. So Afghanistan war has nothing to do with Soviet collapse. Nothing. Except for this question of ideas. Can I tell this or are we out of time?
Yes, please.
Okay? So, why did Soviet Union invade? What were they thinking? Were they so stupid? What was going through their minds? What were they doing sending troops? So this is what happened. They got ambushed by the ideas. Remember, they had Afghan Communist Party, fewer people than here in this room, only about 12 to 15 people, 1965. One of the last ones created in the whole world, Afghan Communist Party. And the Afghan Communist Party has a Stalinist in power in the regime, late 70s. He is doing collectivization of agriculture. He's doing purges and terror like Stalin did. He's discrediting the Soviet image by being Stalinist. And Andropov doesn't know what to do. So they decide, we're going to have a coup. We're going to have a coup. This guy, Amin, the Stalinist, they're going to remove him, they're going to kill him. They have Karmal in Prague. Amin's people, they're hunting, trying to assassinate Karmal. So they bring Karmal back to Moscow. And they send Karmal in and put him, they kill Amin, and they put Karmal. It's a success. It's only a coup. It's nothing more. To remove the Stalinists and to put the reform-minded, more middle-of-the-road, pro-Leninist Karmal in. But in discussion, Ustinov says to Andropov, well, what about the security situation? If we put him in, maybe there'll be a counter-coup. So we have to try to make it secure. Okay, how many troops you need? Maybe 10,000. Oh, I don't know, maybe 15,000. Maybe 40,000. By the time they're finished, 60,000 and then 100,000, only for security after the coup is success. Amin is murdered and Karmal is installed. And the troops go only to provide security. They're not there to invade. They have already done the coup, and it has worked. But the force to provide security stays because the place is not secure. It gets worse and worse. And it becomes an occupation and an invasion. But this is not intention. The troops for security are sent for 3 months. They have a 3-month duty, and they're supposed to be recalled after 3 months. Instead, they stay, and more troops come. And then it's a year, and 2 years, and finally 10 years. But there's no intention of invasion. It is merely a coup. And it's a coup to destroy the Stalinists. That is the only reason for the coup. Right? There's a lot of talk about CIA, these other questions, and this and that. But if you look at the internal KGB material, it's about this crazy Stalinist Amin, right? Now, in the end, Afghanistan is not trivial. It's very important. People say to me, Afghanistan is Soviet Union, Vietnam. The Soviet Vietnam. This is incorrect. There's no public discussion in Soviet Union like in the United States. The United States-Vietnam War is on the television every night. I watched the Vietnam War and the killing of the dying on the television when I was a small boy. This was Vietnam. It tore apart the whole American society. Afghanistan is not the Soviet Vietnam. Afghanistan is the Afghan Vietnam. 1 million, at least, Afghans are killed. It's the Afghan Vietnam, not the Soviet Vietnam.
We would like to thank a lot to you for allowing us to witness your intellectual engagement, and we'll stay with your books and read them further, and hopefully you will come once again to Georgia University. Thank you so much.